Most people think hitting your first $1 million means you've made it. Well, most people are almost always wrong. Your first million is not for flexing, it's for building freedom. 6 months ago, I thought $1 million would solve every problem in my life. Seriously. I thought once I hit that number, everything would click into place. I imagined waking up stress-free, no anxiety, no checking my bank account, no worrying about layoffs, rent increases, inflation, or whether I was wasting my 20s, sitting in traffic just to make somebody else richer. $1 million felt like the finish line. But the more I studied money, the more I talked to wealthy people, the more I analyzed how people actually build financial freedom, the more I realized something important. Most people completely ruin their first million. Not because they're stupid, not because they're irresponsible, but because nobody teaches you what wealth is actually for. And the scary part is that the first million is probably the hardest money you will ever make in your entire life. People say that all the time, but they don't really explain why. The first million requires you to completely transform your identity. You go from somebody who survives to somebody who thinks long term. You go from reacting to bills to allocating capital. You go from needing money to managing money. And that transition destroys people, because when most people finally get money, they immediately try to buy the life they were emotionally deprived of for years. They buy the car, the luxury apartment, the designer clothes, bottle service, expensive vacations, watches, status, validation. And look, I get it. If you grew up broke, if you spent years stressed about money, if you watched everybody else enjoy life while you stayed disciplined, of course, part of you wants to finally feel successful. But here's the truth. Nobody wants to say out loud. The fastest way to become broke again is trying to look rich too early. Your first million should not be spent proving you made it. It should be spent making sure you never have to start over again. That is the entire game, because $1 million today is weird. It's simultaneously a huge amount of money, but also not really enough. In some cities, a regular house is already $1 million. A decent retirement today might require multiple millions. Inflation is destroying purchasing power every single year. So if you hit your first million and immediately start spending like a celebrity, you're cooked. And honestly, social media makes this worse, because now everyone thinks wealth is supposed to look flashy. People see entrepreneurs online driving Lamborghinis, flying first class, living in penthouses, and they think, once I get money, that's what I'm supposed to do too. But most actually wealthy people don't move like that. A lot of real millionaires are honestly boring. They drive normal cars, they wear basic clothes, they invest aggressively, they protect their time, they think in decades, and most importantly, they understand that wealth is not about consumption. It's about ownership. That's the mindset shift most people never make. Poor people use money to buy liabilities. Rich people use money to buy cash flow. That single difference changes everything. If I somehow woke up tomorrow with my first $1 million liquid after taxes, here's exactly how I would think about spending it. And notice I said spending, not flexing, because there's a difference. The first thing I would buy is time, not a Ferrari, not a Rolex, not some insane penthouse lease, because time is the only asset you can never earn back. I would immediately eliminate anything in my life that constantly drains energy for no reason. Long commutes, toxic work environments, chaotic living situations, financial anxiety, the constant pressure to survive month to month. That doesn't mean retiring immediately and doing nothing. Honestly, I think that destroys people too. Human beings need progress, we need goals, we need challenge, we need purpose. But there's a massive difference between working because you're trapped and working because you choose to. And most people don't realize this, but your first million is less about buying stuff and more about buying leverage. Leverage over your schedule, leverage over your stress, leverage over your future decisions. Because once you remove desperation from your life, you start thinking differently. You become calmer, more strategic, less emotional. You stop making panic decisions. And ironically, that's usually when people make even more money. The second thing I would spend money on is stability. And I know that sounds boring, but boring is underrated. You know what's actually luxurious? Sleeping peacefully, knowing you can survive layoffs, knowing one medical emergency won't wipe you out, that rent increases won't destroy your life, and that your investments are compounding while you sleep. So I'd build a financial foundation that is basically unshakable. Emergency fund, index funds, cash flowing assets, maybe a duplex or triplex or a business or dividend stocks, maybe a SaaS company. Something that produces income whether I'm actively working or not, because if your $1 million is only sitting there losing value to inflation while you spend against it, eventually it will disappear. And that's another thing people misunderstand. Wealth is not the money itself. Wealth is the system that produces the money. That's why lottery winners go broke. They receive money without becoming the kind of person capable of sustaining it. Honestly, I think a lot of people fantasize about becoming rich without realizing how psychologically difficult it actually is, because suddenly everyone treats you differently. Your friends expect things from you and your family expects things from you. You feel pressure to maintain a lifestyle. You start comparing yourself to even wealthier people, and the lifestyle inflation never ends. That's why if you don't build discipline before money, money amplifies your worst habits. If you're insecure while broke, you'll become insecure with expensive hobbies. If you're impulsive while broke, you'll become impulsive with higher stakes. If you lack direction while broke, money won't magically give your life meaning. In fact, for a lot of people, it exposes the emptiness faster. And I know that sounds dark, but it's true. Some of the unhappiest people I've ever seen are people who chase money with no larger purpose attached to it. Because eventually they buy everything they wanted and realize they still feel anxious, still restless, still lost, still comparing themselves to other people online. That's why your first million should also buy clarity. Not just comfort, I would invest heavily into my health, and I don't mean biohacking nonsense, I mean the fundamentals most people ignore for decades. Good food, consistent exercise, better sleep, lower stress, regular checkups, and a calmer environment. Because what's the point of becoming financially free if your body is destroyed by 45? And honestly, modern work culture is brutal on people just sitting all day. Constant stimulation, artificial lighting, stress, doom scrolling, ultra processed food, no sunlight, no movement. People are literally sacrificing their health to survive economically. So if I had my first million, I'd spend part of it designing a healthier life. Not a more impressive one, a healthier one. That's another huge distinction. A lot of purchases look successful but actually make life worse. A massive luxury house that traps you into insane maintenance costs, the exotic car that stresses you every time you park it, the designer lifestyle that requires constant income just to sustain appearances. That's not freedom. That's a prettier cage. And honestly, I think one of the smartest things you can do with your first million is create optionality, the ability to pivot your life, because most people stay in terrible situations because they financially have to. Bad jobs, relationships, bad cities, and bad routines. Money gives you the ability to leave. That's power. Not dominance over other people, control over your own direction. And personally, I probably use part of that money to lower my burn rate permanently. Maybe buying property in a lower cost of living area, maybe moving abroad eventually, or creating systems where my monthly expenses stay relatively low compared to my investments, because the lower your required expenses, the freer you become. That's one of the biggest financial cheat codes nobody talks about. A person making $80,000 with low expenses can honestly be wealthier than someone making $300,000 living recklessly. Because wealth isn't income, it's the gap between what you earn and what you need. And social media completely distorts this. Everybody wants to increase income. Almost nobody wants to reduce dependency, but dependency is what traps people. The bigger your lifestyle gets, the more you need to sustain it. That's why I genuinely think the goal shouldn't be looking rich, it should be becoming anti-fragile. Becoming difficult to financially destroy, that's real wealth, and if I'm being honest, I probably would buy a few fun things too. I'm not one of those people who thinks you should live like a monk forever. Life is supposed to be enjoyed. I'd travel, I'd upgrade parts of my life, I'd probably build an insane desk setup. Maybe a nice apartment with a good view, maybe some experiences with people I care about. But the key difference is those things would come after the foundation, not before it. Because rewards feel way better when they aren't financed by insecurity. And another thing people rarely mention is this. Your first million should buy you proximity to better people. Not fake networking, not cringe, entrepreneur masterminds where everybody rents Lamborghinis for Instagram photos. I mean genuinely smart, disciplined, grounded people. People building things, thinking long term. People with integrity. People who challenge you. Your environment matters so much more than people realize. If everybody around you spends recklessly, you'll normalize reckless spending. If everybody around you thinks long-term, you'll normalize investing and discipline. That's why successful people often cluster together. Mindsets compound socially. And honestly, one of the worst things you can do after making money is isolate yourself emotionally. Because success can get weirdly lonely. People project onto you, some resent you, and some even envy you. Some only talk to you because they want something. That's why meaningful relationships become even more valuable as your financial situation improves. Because eventually you realize money solves money problems. It does not solve human problems. It doesn't automatically create fulfillment. It doesn't guarantee purpose. It doesn't guarantee love. It doesn't guarantee peace. And I think a lot of people secretly believe, once I get rich, I'll finally become the person I want to be. But that person is usually built long before the money arrives, through discipline and consistency, through delayed gratification and self-respect, vision and resilience. The $1 million is usually just the scoreboard reflecting those traits, and that's why the way you spend your first million matters so much, because it reveals what you actually value. Do you value appearances or freedom? Do you value validation or peace? Do you value short-term dopamine or long-term optionality? Because your first million can either permanently elevate your life or permanently trap you into maintaining an expensive identity. And honestly, I think one of the best uses of wealth is creating space to think. Most people never get uninterrupted time to reflect anymore. They wake up exhausted, go to work, scroll during breaks, come home tired, watch content, sleep, and repeat. There's no silence, no reflection, no deep thinking, just constant stimulation. So if I had my first million, I'd intentionally create room for thought, because if you don't consciously decide what matters to you, society will decide decide for you. And society usually chooses consumption. Buy more, upgrade more, and flex more. And just compare more. That cycle never ends. There's always someone richer, always someone younger, always someone more successful. So if your happiness depends on external comparison, you will never feel wealthy. That's why I think real financial freedom is psychological before it's numerical. It's reaching a point where your self-worth is no longer tied to constant economic performance. And that's rare, especially today, because modern culture turns every human being into a brand. Everybody feels pressure to monetize themselves, optimize themselves, scale themselves. And while ambition is good, eventually you have to ask, what kind of life am I actually building? Because if your $1 million only buys a more stressful version of your old life, what was the point? I think the ideal outcome is simple. Your first million should create safety, leverage, health, freedom, optionality, time, and finally, peace. Everything else is secondary. And honestly, I think one of the most underrated flexes in the world today is being calm. Not needing to impress people, not panicking about bills, not chasing validation constantly, not living performatively online, just quietly building a life you genuinely enjoy. That's wealth. Not the rented Lamborghini, not the nightclub sections, not pretending to be successful for strangers on the internet. Real wealth is waking up and feeling like your life actually belongs to you. And if you ever reach your first $1 million, don't waste it trying to convince other people you made it. Use it to make sure you never have to fake anything ever again. Because at the end of the day, the goal was never really the money, the goal was freedom, and the people who understand that are usually the ones who keep the money the longest. Anyways, that's going to be it for this conversation today. If you enjoyed this video, click the like button because it genuinely helps push these videos out to more people. Subscribe if you're new and let me know in the comments what you would do with your first $1 million. I appreciate you for watching all the way through, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.